Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite video games. Disclaimer, this is not in any particular order. I will do a proper ranking of all of my favorite games at some point in the near future. But today I just wanted to have a chat with you guys about some of the games that I really love and that have really had an impact on me and use that to kind of kickstart the discussion. I mentioned in my first video that I might use this channel to talk about video games. I was kind of umming and ahhing about it, and then I thought, you know what, video games are such a big part of who I am, and they also kind of influence the books that I read as well, and it was kind of a no-brainer in the end. Before I actually go into the games that I want to talk about, the one thing I will mention is that I am a PlayStation gamer. I do not have a PC at the moment, planning to get one when I move next year. I've pretty much grown up on Nintendo and PlayStation since I was a very, very young child. So all of the games that you will hear are either PlayStation exclusives or you can play them all on PlayStation because that's the console that I have. Just wanted to flag that. Let's jump right in. So there's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games that I'm gonna mention. Again, these aren't necessarily all my favorites. There's definitely more favorites that I have, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the types of games that I like to play. So the first IP I'm going to talk about is Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed genuinely changed my view on game development. And I'm specifically talking about the Ezio trilogy, so AC2, AC Brotherhood, and AC Revelations. Those games are perfection. They are the closest thing, I mean, not even the closest thing to perfection, they are just perfection, full stop. Everything works. The story, the characters, the maps, I should say, the music, the development of the story, it just works. It just works perfectly. The thing about those games is, so I used to work in game development, so I know a lot about how the sausage is made. Those games should be reverse engineered by anybody who wants to go into game development to understand how a good game should be made. They are just, okay, I'm gonna stop gushing because it's just gonna get boring. Those games, so as I mentioned before, I've been playing games since I was very young, but there was kind of this period where I feel like I was playing games not because of the enjoyment, but because, I don't know, like my brothers were playing them, and so I felt like I kind of needed to. And AC was the IP that basically made me rediscover my love and my passion for games and game development. I remember playing those games when they came out, and I was absolutely hooked. Everything about them is beautifully designed. I'm playing the remastered editions right now on my PS4 and they still hold. They still look incredibly beautiful, play incredibly well, it's not janky, and they're just really satisfying. You feel like you are in Venice, you feel like you're in Rome, you feel like you're in Florence, you feel like Ezio. It sounds really cringe, but you do feel like you are him. I've just repeated myself 10 times, but I can't hammer home the fact how amazing those games are. And I think the most disappointing thing about it is if you look at the subsequent games that were developed, they do not even measure up I don't even think they're on the same level playing field in any way, shape or form. I know a lot of people really liked Black Flag. I personally detested Black Flag. It was actually the first game that I didn't finish playing, which is unheard of for me. It's the same with books. I very rarely don't finish a book, but recently I've changed my perspective on that. But same with games, right? I always try to kind of get to the end to kind of see what happens. But that was the first game that I just did not gel with, and I just couldn't give a crap about it. And so I stopped playing it halfway through. And then I played some of the subsequent ones. I played the one in London, I forgot what it's called. And that one was okay. I quite like the dynamic of the brother and the sister and that you could pick which one you played as. I also like the fact that it was in London. I live in London, so it's quite nice to see familiar places. And then I also played Origins, which is the one that is set in Egypt. And again, I like that because I like Egyptian history, and the fact that it's set in ancient Egypt as well was kind of cool. But again, is it as good as the Ezio trilogy? No, they are not even close. And so that's why AC has a firm spot as one of my favorite IPs of all time. I just love it. I love that it's so open world as well. So anyway, I'm gonna stop on AC. The next IP was another IP that was coming out around the same time, and that was Uncharted, which was developed by Naughty Dog. Uncharted has a very, very, very special place in my heart because I love Nate. Nate is one of my favorite game characters, and he's witty, he's kind of dumb, but he's also really smart. I love the different settings. The thing I love about Uncharted is you kind of get exposed to these different mythologies that you hear about, Shambhala, Irem of the Pillars, a couple of others. And it just feels kind of nice to be in a somewhat familiar setting. The other thing I love about it is the fact that you kind of go all over the world as part of the story, and you also get some really cool characters. I guess the main difference between AC and Uncharted is Uncharted is a very linear story, whereas AC is very open world. There's lots of different subplots, missions and stories and quests that you can follow, and they're entirely optional, but they do enrich the experience. Whereas Uncharted, it's very linear, it's very straightforward. You just kind of follow the story as you go along. It's amazing. I mean, the second one was my favorite, and then the fourth one, then the third, and then the first. And I would love to do a dedicated video just on Uncharted, because I feel like the evolution of the story and the characters is done really well. And I really hope they do another one, but who knows? The next one I'm going to talk about was developed by Insomniac Studios, and that is unsurprisingly SpiderMan. SpiderMan is so good. So New York is my favorite city out of all of the cities that I've visited. And so the fact that you pair up the city that I love with one of my favorite superheroes, if not my favorite superhero, is just like amazing. And I love the story of Peter Parker. I think, you know, he's super relatable as a character for me personally. Getting to experience Spider-Man in the way that you get to experience Spider-Man in that game is just so well done. The gameplay mechanics are amazing. The swinging is just chef's kiss. Just everything about it. I mean, the one thing I will mention about Spider-Man is that it can get a little bit repetitive with the side missions, but because the way they've designed the game and the way that the city looks and feels, it kind of counteracts that. There were moments where I would just swing around for like half an hour, just exploring New York. I do that multiple times. I still, even now, I mean, I've played it like 3 times now, I think. And I play the DLCs as well. And there are times when I just want to do that. And so I will go back and play the game. And I won't do any missions. I'll just go and explore New York, which I think is quite funny. It's just so beautiful. And like I said, the swinging is so satisfying. The way that they kind of rendered New York was just perfection. Like, it just looks so good. And I did the classic thing that most people did who visited New York. I went and tried to go and find my favorite places, and they're all there. And it's so cool. So definitely Spider-Man is up there. All right. So this next one, I was super surprised that I was going to love it because I hadn't played any of the previous games. And that is God of War, developed by Santa Monica Studios. God of War, I also think that is another game that is very close to perfection. Oh, actually, I think it is perfection. I was going to say, like, is it close to perfection or is it perfection? And I can't think of anything that I didn't like about it. So I never played the early God of War games because I think my mum didn't let me because they're very violent. And, you know, I wasn't really into kind of those types of games when I was younger. The way that they created Kratos and Atreus and then this incredible world that you kind of get to explore as the duo. And like so when God of War came out, I was working in game development and I went to one of the conferences that Cory Barlog held at the Games Developer Conference that's held in LA. Well, not anymore, but pre-COVID it was held in LA. And I actually met him, and he's a really cool guy, really lovely person. And you can see the raw passion that comes through in telling this story of Kratos and how he has developed as a character. And as I mentioned, like, I haven't played the games, but I've watched a lot of the videos that tell the story and his development throughout the IP. Knowing what I know of kind of what happened in the previous games, and I don't want to necessarily spoil it, and then how he starts at the beginning of God of War and ends at God of War, is his character development is just so good. I felt him grow quite a lot throughout the story, and you also get that with Atreus as well, right? He's this very, like, naive young child who doesn't know the reality of his father and who he is and what he's done in the past, and he also doesn't fully understand what that means for him, of course. And by the end of it, he kind of loses some of that innocence, which is kind of sad, but then you also kind of feel satisfied by the fact that he's kind of realized that he is who he is. And that twist at the end, I'm not going to reveal what that twist is, but that twist at the end where you discover the kind of truth of his heritage it was one of the best, like, reveals that I've experienced in any form of media. Cannot wait for the second game to come out. The second game in this kind of telling of the story, which I'm hoping that they're going to do a release trailer of it next year. Kind of makes sense because it's been a couple of years with a release of maybe 2023, and I'm so excited. Mechanics as well, like when you throw the axe, so satisfying. Again, another one of those instances like Spider-Man where I would just like go find bad guys to just kill them because I just wanted to use the axe. God of War, if you want to play a beautiful game, honestly one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, with an incredibly rich story, with characters that you're kind of going to hate one minute and then you're going to love in the next minute. The next IP that I'm going to talk about is by a game studio that I mentioned earlier, which is Naughty Dog, and that is The Last of Us. I'm not going to talk about The Last of Us 2. That's a discussion for another day. But the first Last of Us, I think that game is perfection. I don't know, I mean, it's not a particularly original story. It's a very dystopian story set years after an infection has spread out. A very large part of the population has been infected by this disease, whatever you want to call it. And you're following two characters, Joel and Ellie. I'm not going to talk too much about how you kind of get to that point, because again, you should just go play it. But you follow these two characters, and the dynamic between these two characters is just so well done. And that's the thing, like I said, it's not original. There's a lot of stories where you have the kind of rough guy who's had a really tough life, and then you have the young girl, like it's kind of a typical dynamic. The way that their relationship develops and the way that their characters develop is just really phenomenally done. You can only root for them, right? Like you can only root for them to get to their goal by the end of the game. You love that their relationship turns into a very kind of paternalistic relationship, and you're rooting for it, and you're rooting for them as a duo, but also as individuals. It's a very tragic story. It's set across obviously a very dark backdrop where they are as kind of ruled by, you know, factions and violence, and, you know, essentially whoever has the weapons and the medicine are the people who are the kind of most powerful. And then you have these two people who are ultimately trying to achieve a goal which will render a lot of that moot, but things happen along the way, and then obviously there's the twist at the end, and it's just this very emotional, dark, kind of pessimistic story. But then there are moments of hope, and that's what makes the story so relatable, I think, because while it is dark, you have these two characters who, for better or worse, kind of feed off each other. It's just so pure and it's so innocent in some ways. They're so diametrically opposed in every way, but it works. It works really well. Ellie questions Joel a lot, and Joel kind of helps educate Ellie, and it's just this really cool dynamic between these two characters. And then you have some kind of side characters who are pretty awesome as well. Henry, and then you have Tess, and there's a couple of others. I just think Last of Us, regardless of what you think of the second one, and like I said, I'll do a second video on that at some point. The first game, I've replayed it like 4 or 5 times now. I mean, I feel like I'm saying all these games are perfection, but that's why they're my favorites, right? Like, I was about to say I look forward to seeing what they do with the next one, but to be honest with you, after what they did with the second one, I'm not sure if I am. But let's leave that there. Okay, we've got 3 more left. The next 3 are all kind of open world RPG games, or have like RPG elements. The first one I'll talk about is The Witcher by CD Projekt Red. The Witcher, I kind of came to this game quite late. I've not played the previous ones. I kind of came to these games quite late, but I only played the kind of most recent one that they released, you know, however many years ago that was. And The Witcher is, I mean, I love Geralt. I mean, who doesn't? He's such a weirdly relatable character. His kind of lack of patience for the incompetency of most people in that world is just something that I face on a daily basis. I feel like sometimes when I'm grumbling about something, I feel like Geralt in that sense, which is quite funny. He's just such a likable character. I think some people find him a bit flat, but that's what I like about him is that he's actually a very complex individual, but he comes across as very flat. He's just so well executed. And I mean, I watched the show, and I think the show did a good job of presenting him in that way. But I think the game is definitely, but I haven't read the books yet. I do own the first one, but it's going to be a while till I get to it. But the game is so beautifully realized as well, right? Like the map is huge. I think I've invested about 60 to 70 hours into The Witcher, and I still have done most of the side missions, and I'm yet to play the second DLC or expansion pack. And it's just so like, I mean, it's one of those games that I kind of go back to when I feel like kind of playing something familiar, but I don't necessarily want to really think about the story too much, and I just want to explore. That's when I pick up Witcher now. I want to get to the expansion pack soon. I kind of want to play that when I have time to play it kind of consistently, otherwise I'll kind of forget. It's a world that I love going back to. I love Geralt. I love the other characters, especially in the game. He's called Dandelion, and love the fighting mechanics as well. I think they're super satisfying. And the magic as well is quite cool. I mean, overall, I think it's a super rich world with lots of intricate subplots and big plots, and it's kind of set across this backdrop of really interesting political intrigue. Witcher is definitely up there. The penultimate one that I'm going to talk about is Red Dead 2. So Red Dead 2, I think has got to be one of my top 3 games of all time. It was developed by Rockstar Games, and I actually have a couple of friends who worked on the game, which is awesome. Red Dead 2, so I did play Red Dead 1, I played the remastered version, and I liked it, I thought it was good, but Red Dead 2 is not only one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, it has got one of the best, if not the best game character that I've ever played as, and that is Arthur Morgan. I want to do a separate video on Red Dead 2 because there's so many different aspects that you can talk about. The story is phenomenal, the side quests are phenomenal, the beautiful landscape, the soundtrack is just amazing. But Arthur, if I had to kind of pick one thing out of the whole kind of sea of amazing things about this game, Arthur Morgan's character is the thing that makes it for me. Arthur Morgan, his character progression throughout is just so well executed, but you really feel his pain as he's going throughout the journey, because I feel like Arthur has a lot of frustration with the people around him and the situation that he's in, and you really feel for him. I actually felt that I sympathized with him quite a lot. Again, some of the struggles that he has with people around him who are just idiotic sometimes. Again, I kind of I face that. And there was definitely a time where I would say things to myself and I was like, oh man, that's something Arthur Morgan would say. He's one of the few characters that has really stuck with me. I don't want to spoil anything, but that ending is, I mean, if you play the game, you know what I'm talking about. And I think Arthur Morgan for me will go down as one of the best characters ever developed in game development history. At first, you kind of think of him as a little bit of a simpleton. As the story developed and as you go through the chapters and as he interacts with other characters, you actually realize that he's to be a very good person, but he's in this circumstance that somewhat prevents him from being able to do that. And sure, you can ask the question, well, why doesn't he leave that? Well, you kind of get views into his inner thoughts, and he's so done with it, but also feels simultaneously stuck in it that you can't help but sympathize with him or empathize with him. He's one that I think about quite a lot, interestingly. And then last but not least, and like I said, this is in no particular order, is Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch Studios. Ghost of Tsushima, amazing game. I love the fact that it's set in a world that I know very little about. I knew very little about Tsushima and the war that was happening there at that time, and I actually learned quite a lot as a result of playing the game. Then I also actually went out and did some reading myself because I was super interested in kind of what really happened. Again, another one of the most beautiful games I have ever played. The scenery is absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. The way they use color in that game is just, I've never seen any game use color in that way so well. The characters were okay. I don't think there are any characters that particularly stuck out. The fighting mechanics are really well done. The way that you do sword play is super satisfying, especially when you kind of parry and then you get the supercharge points and stuff like that. I love the way that they did all of that. I love the skill tree as well. I played it because there's kind of two ways that you can play it. You can play it as a ghost, so you can do everything in stealth and you can kind of develop your skill set in that way, or you can be the warrior that you are at the beginning of the book and not do things in a stealthy way. I almost always take the stealth route because I think it's more fun to do things in stealth rather than just kind of going gung-ho into a battle. I think stealth is far more satisfying. For me, one of my favorite weapons to play with is a bow and arrow because, like I said, killing someone with a bow and arrow versus with a gun is just more satisfying. The fact that you get those two options is kind of cool because if you are somebody who likes to kind of just go all in and do your thing, you can do that. But for people who kind of want to play it as the Ghost of Tsushima rather than as a samurai, you have that option. Ghost of Tsushima is definitely one of my more recent favorites. It suffers the same thing as SpiderMan, which is some of the side quests kind of get a little bit repetitive. It's really interesting because Assassin's Creed has a lot of side quests, but for me, none of those side quests got repetitive. Even though there are some similar ones, I never ever got bored doing the side quests in the Ezio trilogy. Whereas I think sometimes in Ghost of Tsushima or SpiderMan, maybe even Red Dead 2 a little bit, some of the side quests are quite repetitive, and so you just feel like you're doing the same thing again and again. That being said, because it's set in such a beautiful world and because it's so satisfying to look at, you kind of don't mind doing it. The soundtrack is also amazing, and I think the way that they realized kind of different parts of the map was quite cool as well, because the bottom part of the map has got a very distinct look compared to the middle part of the map and the top part of the map, and that also kind of tracks with the progression of the story as well. So Ghost of Tsushima is definitely one of my favorite games that has come out. I'm super excited with what they do with the second one. I cannot wait for it to come out. I will play it instantly, and I'll probably take a day off work if I can and just blitz it in a day or two. I'm excited for that day. So there you have it. Those are some of my favorite games that I love and adore and kind of rave about all the time. You'll probably be able to tell there's kind of two main categories that the games that I like fall into. The first category is these kind of open world games with lots of exploration and kind of RPG elements where you can kind of upskill. And then the second category is these more linear, story-driven, straightforward games that I really like. You're kind of, I guess the difference is the first one, I feel more engrossed in the game because you are developing the character yourself. Whereas in the second category, you're kind of going along with the narrative rather than feeling like you're a part of the narrative. And I think that's maybe the main distinction for me. But I like both. I think it kind of depends on what mood I am in. Those are definitely my two main kind of buckets of games that I love. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. I feel like this video has gone on a little bit longer than I intended. I'd love to hear what are some of your favorite games. I mean, I have more, but I kind of wanted to just focus on ones that I've really kind of picked up over the last kind of decade or however long it's been. I'm super curious to hear if you played any of these games, what you thought of them, if there's any other games that you think I should play based off of this. Let's take it down to the comments, and I will speak to you guys soon. In the meantime, take care and have a lovely day. Bye.